Let us examine some of symptoms of the fear of criticism. A majority of people permit relatives, okay, friends, and the public at large to so influence them that they cannot live their own lives because they fear criticism. Huge number of people make mistakes in marriage, stand by the bargain, and go through life miserable and unhappy because they fear criticism, which may follow if they correct the mistake. Anyone who has submitted to this form of fear knows the irreparable damage it does by destroying ambition, self-reliance, okay, and the desire to achieve. Millions of people who neglect to acquire belated educations after having left school because they fear criticism. Countless numbers of men and women, both you and all, permit relatives to wreak their lives in the name of duty because they fear criticism. Duty does not require any person to submit to the destruction of his personal ambition and the right to live his own life is in his own way. People refuse to make chances in business because they fear the criticism which may follow if they fail. The fear of criticism in such cases is stronger than the desire for success. Too many people refuse to set high goals for themselves or even neglect selecting a career because they fear the criticism of relatives and friends who may say, "Don't aim so high, people will think you are crazy." When Andrew Carnegie suggested that I devote 20 years to the organization to a philosophy of individual achievement, my first impulse of thought was fear of what people might say. The suggestion set of a goal for me uh, far out the proportion to any I had ever conceived. As quick as a flash, my mind began to create alibies and excuses, all of them traceable to the inherent fear of criticism. Something inside of me said, "You can't do it. The job is too big and requires too much time. What will your relatives think of you? How will you earn a living? No one has ever organized a philosophy of success. What right have you to believe you can do it? Who are you, anyway, to aim so high? Remember your humble birth. What do you know about philosophy? People will think you are crazy, and they did. Why hasn't some other person done this people now? These and many other questions flashed on into my mind and demanded attention. It seemed as if the whole world had suddenly turned its attention to me with the purpose of ridiculing me into giving up all desire to carry out Mr. Carnegie's suggestion. I had a fine opportunities then and there to kill off ambition before it gained control of me. Later in my life, after having analyzed thousands of people, I discovered that most ideas are still born and need the breath of life injected into them through definite plans of immediate action. The time to know an idea is at the time of its birth. Every minute it lives gives it a better chance of surviving. The fear of criticism is at the bottom of the destruction of most ideas, which never reach the planning and action stage. Many people believe that material success is the result of favorable breaks. There is an element of ground for the belief, but those depending entirely upon luck are always disappointed because they overlook another important factor which must be present before one can be sure of success. It is the knowledge with which favorable breaks can be made to order. During the Depression, W.C. Fields, the comedian, lost all his money and found himself without income, without a job, and his means of earning a living vaudeville no longer existed. Moreover, he was past 60 when many men consider themselves old. He was so eager to stage a comeback that he afforded to work without pay in new field movies. In addition to his other troubles, he fell and injured his neck. Too many that would have been the place to give up and quiet. But Fields was persistent. He knew that if he carried on, he would get the breaks sooner or later, and he did get them, but not by a chance. Mary Dressler found herself down and out with her money gone with no job. When she was about 60, she too went after the breaks and got them. Her persistence brought the astounding a tempo late in life, long beyond the age when most men and women are done with ambition to achieve. Eddie Cantor lost his money in the 1929 stock crash, but he still had his persistence and his courage. With these flaws too prominent eyes, he exploited himself back into a income of 10,000 a week. Verily, if one has persistence, one can get along well without many other qualities. The only break anyone can afford to rely upon in a self-made break. This comes through the application of persistence. The starting point is the definiteness of purpose, and examine the first 100 people you meet. Ask them what they want most in life, and 98 of them will not be able to tell you. If you press them for an answer, some will say security, men will say money, and a few will say happiness, and others will say fame and power, and still other will say social recognition is in living, ability to sing, dance, and write, but none of them will able to define these terms and give a slightest indication of a plan by which the people to attain these vaguely expressed wishes do not respond to wishes. They respond only to definite plans backed by definite desires through constant persistence. Okay, how to develop persistence? There are four simple steps which lead to the habit of persistence. They call for great amount of intelligence, no particular amount of education, but little time or effort. The necessary steps are a definite purpose backed by burning desire for its fulfillment, and second is a definite plan expressed in continuous action, a mind closed tightly against all negative and discouraging influences, including negative suggestions of relatives, friends, and acquaintances. And fourth is a friendly alliance with one or more persons who will encourage one to follow through with both plan and purpose. Okay, these four steps are essential for success in all walks of life. The entire purpose of 13 principles of this philosophy is to enable one to take these four steps as a matter of habit. These are the steps by which one may control one's economic destiny. They are the steps that lead to freedom and independence of thought. They are the steps that lead to riches in small and great quantities. They lead a way to power, fame, and worldly recognition. They are the four steps which guarantee favorable breaks. They are the steps that convert dreams into physical realities. They lead also to mastery of fear, discouragement, indifference. There is a magnificent reward for all who learn to take these four steps. It is the privilege of writing one's own ticket and of making life real whatever price is asked. I have no way of knowing the facts, but I venture to conjecture that Mr. Wallis Simpson's great love for a man was not accidental, nor the result of favorable breaks alone. There was a burning desire and careful searching at every step of the way. Her first duty was to love. What is the greatest thing on earth? The master called it love. Not man-made rules, criticism, bitterness, slander, or political marriages, but love. She knew what she wanted not after she met the Prince of Wales, but long before that, twice when she had failed to find it, she had the courage to continue her search, to thin oneself be true, and it must follow as the night the day thought can such not then be false to any man. Okay, here her rise from obscurity was of the slow, progressive, persistent order, but it was here. She triumphed over unbelievably long odds, and no matter who you are or what you may think of Wallis Simpson or the king who gave up his crown for her love. She is an outstanding example of applied persistence in an instructor on the rules of self-determination from whom the entire world might profitably take lessons. When you think of Wally Simpson, think of one who knew what she wanted and sought the greatest empire on the earth to get it. Women who complain that this is a man's world, that women do not have an equal chance to win, obey it to themselves to study carefully the life of this unusual woman, who at an age which most women consider old captured the affections of the most desirable bachelor in the entire world. And what of King Edward? What lesson may be learned from his part in the world's greatest drama? Recent times, did he pay too high price for the affections of the woman of his choice? Surely, no one but he can give the correct answer. The rest of us can only conjecture. This much we know. The king came into the world without his own consent. He was born to great riches without requesting them. He was persistently sought in marriage. Politicians and salesmen throughout Europe tossed down dowagers and the princess at his feet because he was the firstborn of his parents. He had inherited a crown which he did not seek and perhaps could not live with his life in his own way, had but little privacy and finally assumed duties inflicted upon him when he ascended the throne. Some will say, with all these blessings, King Edward should have found peace of mind, contentment, and joy of living. The truth is that to beg the peak of all privileges of a crown, all the money, the fame, and the power inherited by King Edward, there was an emptiness which could be filled only by love. His greatest desire was for love. Long before he met Wallis Simpson, he doubtless felt this great universal emotion tugging at the strings of his heart, beating upon the door of his soul, and crying out for expression, and when he met a kindred spirit crying out for this same holy privilege of expression, he recognized it and without fear or apology opened his heart and bade it enter. All the scandal mongers in the world cannot destroy the beauty of this international drama through which two people found love and had the courage to face criticism, renounce all else, to give it holy expression. King Edward's decision to give up the crown of the world's most powerful empire for the privilege of going the remainder of the way through life with the woman of his choice was a decision that required courage. The decision also had a price, but who has the right to say the price was too great? Surely not he who said, he among you who is without sin, let him cast the first stone, as a suggestion to any able-minded person who chooses to find fault with the Duke of Windsor because his desire was for love and for openly declaring his love for Wallis Simpson and giving of his throne for her. Let it be remembered that the open declaration was not essential. He could have followed the custom of clandestine liaison which has prevailed in Europe for centuries without giving up either his throne or the woman of his choice, and there would have been no complaint from either church or laity. But this unusual man was built of stone or troop. His love was clean. It was deep and sincere. I represented the one thing which above all else he truly desired. Therefore he took what he wanted and paid the price demanded. If Europe had been blessed with more rulers with a human heart and the traits of honesty of ex-King Edward for the first century, that unfortunate hemisphere now seething with greed, hate, lust, political convenience, and threats of war would have a different and better story to tell. A story in which love and not hate would rule. In the words of Stuart Austin Noir, we raise our cup and drink this toast to ex-King Edward and Wallis Simpson. Blessed is the man who has come to know that our muted thoughts are our sweetest thoughts. Okay, blessed is the man who, from the blankest depths, can see the luminous figure of love and seeing, sang, and singing said, sweeter than watered lace are the thoughts I have of you. In these words would we pay tribute to the two people who, more than all other of modern times, have been the victims of criticism and the recipient of abuse because they found life's greatest treasure and they claimed it. Most of the world will applaud, okay, the Duke of Windsor and the Wallis Simpson because of their persistence in searching until they found life's greatest reward. All of us can profit by following their example in our own search for that which we demand for life. What mystical power gives to men of persistence the capacity to master difficulties? Does the quality of persistence set up in one's mind some form of spiritual, mental, or chemical activity which gives one access to supernatural forces? Does infinite intelligence throw itself on the side of the person who still fights on after the battle has been lost, with the whole world on the opposing side? These and many other similar questions have arisen in my mind. Okay, as I have observed men like Henry Ford who started at scratch and built an industrial empire of huge proportion with little else in the way of beginning but persistence, for the Thomas A. Edison who with less than 3 months of schooling became the world's leading inventor and converted persistence into the talking machine, the moving picture machine, and the incandescent light, to say nothing of half a hundred other useful inventions. I had the happy privilege of analyzing both Mr. Edison and Mr. Ford year by year over a long period of years, and therefore the opportunity to study them at close range. So I speak from actual in either of them that even remotely suggested the major source of their stupendous achievements. As one makes an impartial study of the prophets, philosophers, miracle men, and religious leaders in the past, one is drawn to the inevitable conclusion that persistence, concentration of effort, and definiteness of purpose were the major sources of their achievements. Consider, for example, the strands of fascinating story of Muhammad. Analyze his life, compare him with men of achievement in this modern age of industry, finance, and observe how they have one outstanding trait in common: persistence. If you are keenly interested in studying the strange power which gives potency to persistence, read a biography of Muhammad, especially the one by Isaac Bey. This brief review of that book by Thomas Sergio in the Herald Tribune will provide a preview of the rare treat in store for those who take the time read the entire story of one of the most outstanding examples of the power persistence known to civilization. And the last great prophet, reviewed by Thomas Sagrew. Muhammad was a prophet, but he never performed a miracle. He was not a mystic. He had no formal schooling. He did not begin his mission until he was 40 when he announced that he was the messenger of God bringing word of the true religion. He was ridiculed and labeled a lunatic. Children tripped him and women threw filth upon him. He was banished from his native city, Mecca, and his followers were stripped of their worldly goods and sent into the desert from after him. When he had been preaching 10 years, he had nothing to show for it but banishment, poverty, and ridicule. Yet before another 10 years had passed, he was dictator of all Arabia, ruler of Mecca, and head of a new world religion which was to sweep to the Danube and the Pyrenees before exhausting the impetus he gave it. That impetus was threefold: the power of words, the efficacy of prayer, and man's kinship with God. His career never made sense. Muhammad was born to impoverished members of a leading family of Mecca because Mecca, the crossroads of the world, home of the magic stone called the Kaaba, great city of trade and the center of trade routes, was unsanitary. Its children were sent to be raised in the desert by Bedouins. Muhammad was thus nurtured, drawing strength and health from the milk of nomad vicarious mother. He tended sheep and soon hired out to a rich widow as a leader of her caravans. He traveled to all parts of the Eastern world, talked with many men of the diverse beliefs, and observed the decline of Christianity into warning sects. When he was 28, Khadija, the widow, looked, looked upon him with favor and married him. Her father would have objected to such a marriage, so she got him drunk and held him up while he gave the paternal blessing. For the next 12 years, Muhammad lived as a rich and respected and very shrewd trader. Then he took to wandering in the desert, And one day he returned with the first verse of the Quran and told Khadija that the archangel Gabriel had appeared to him and said that he was to be the messenger of God. The Quran, the revealed word of God, was the closest thing to the miracle in Muhammad's life. He had not been a poet, he had no gift of words, yet the verses of the Quran, as he received them and recited them to the faithful, were better than any verses which the professional poets of the tribes could produce. These two Arabs was miracle to them gifts of war was the greatest gift. The poet was all powerful, and in addition to Quran said that all men were equal before God, that the world should be a democratic state. Islam, it was this political hearsay plus Muhammad's desire to destroy all the 360 idols in the courtyard of the Kaaba, which brought about his banishment. The idols brought the desert tribes to Mecca, and that meant trade. So the businessmen of Mecca, the capitalist of which he had been one, set upon Muhammad. Then he retreated to the desert and demanded sovereignty over the world. The rise of Islam began. Out of the desert came a flame which would not be extinguished, a democratic army fighting as a unit and prepared to die without flinching. Muhammad had invited the Jews and Christians to join him, for he was not building a new religion. He was calling all who believed in one God to join in a single faith. If the Jews and the Christians had accepted his invitation, Islam would have conquered the world. They did not. They would not even accept Muhammad's innovation of human warfare. When the armies of the Prophet entered Jerusalem, not a single person was killed because of his faith. When the Crusader entered the city centuries later, not a Muslim man, woman, or child was spared. But the Christian did accept one Muslim idea, the place of learning, the university. Okay, this is all about this chapter. Okay, this chapter I will be divide into parts, first part and second part. This is the second part. Okay, see you next video with another chapter, chapter number 10, the power of the mastermind. आपके जब mastermind जो बनाया था ना उसकी power को आप कैसे बोलेंगे? Okay, okay, मिलते हैं next video में. Bye and sorry for the background noise के लिए.